Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We'll just give it a couple of minutes before we start. We're just waiting for a few other people to arrive. Hi everyone, it's Kath here from the Charity for Civil Servants. Welcome to the webinar today on an introduction to stress, anxiety and depression for managers. We'll just give it a few more minutes to allow a few more people to join, and then we'll try and get started pretty promptly at 11 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. It's Kath Cheer here from the Charity for Civil Servants, and welcome to the webinar, An Introduction to Stress, Anxiety and Depression for Managers. Just as a very quick, I think I'll just talk to you briefly first about the format of the session. We know that there will be some people joining us online, and there'll also be others joining by telephone. If you're joining by telephone, you should be able to download the slides from the website, so you should be able to have those in front of you while we're going through the session today. During the course of the session, there'll be a few polls just to get your views on things. Unfortunately, if you're on the phone, you won't be able to join in with those, but I will talk through them as we're doing them, so you'll know what's going on. There will be a few opportunities as well to make comments on things during the session. If you're online, on your screen, you should either see an orange box with an arrow in it or a question mark at the top of your screen. If you click on that, you should be able to join in by making comments. If you're on the phone, unfortunately, you obviously don't have that facility, but you can email comments if you wish to webinar@foryoubyou.org.uk. So I think we'll get going now. Just as a quick introduction to myself, I've worked for the charity for about 5 years and really kind of doing mostly things around mental health and well-being. Done a whole range of other jobs before then. This is a session particularly around managers. I don't actually manage staff at the moment. I have managed staff in the past. On the whole, I've found it was better for my well-being not to be managing staff. So let's look at what the learning outcomes are for today. So what we're hoping that we'll cover, I mean, obviously it is only an hour's session, so it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. We'll look at mental health facts and figures. I'm hoping that you'll have a greater understanding of stress, anxiety and depression. I'm hoping there'll be a bit of opportunity to think about how to support the staff that you manage, and also that you'll get a greater understanding of the Charity for Civil Servants, what it can do for you, and also for those that you manage. I suspect we've probably advertised that there'll be a question and answer session at the end. I'd be very surprised if we have time for questions and answers if we're going to finish at midday, but really happy if you want to send in questions related to this topic, either during the course of the session or to the webinar email address. We can always look at publishing something on the website which is kind of frequently asked questions. So hopefully you won't lose out by not if we don't quite manage to get through that today. So just a very quick slide about the charity before we move on. The charity is, the vision is a lifelong community of people offering effective support for each other when life takes a turn for the worse. I mean, obviously, we've got a staff team here, but we couldn't do what we do without the community of civil servants, without people like yourselves getting involved, volunteering, giving your time or money, but also then we can provide support when it's needed. So that's a little bit about the charity. Now, before we go on to the next slide, we're just going to do our first poll. So just to explain how this is going to work, the question is, how do you feel about having people with common mental health condition in your team? And you've got an option of 5 options. You feel absolutely fine. Having a mental health condition doesn't appear to impair performance or create work. You know it's inevitable, but you feel cautious because of the extra work. I would feel more confident about it if I felt better informed. I would prefer not to. I'm not sure it's relevant, as we all have mental health and anyone can struggle regardless of whether they have a diagnosis. So I can see the result. That's really interesting as the results coming in. At the moment, we've got 44% on absolutely fine and 44% on feeling happier if you felt better informed, and also 11% saying they're not sure if it's relevant because we all have mental health. So that's really interesting. I think if I can actually share the results with you. So I'm just going to close the poll now and share those results with you just so you can see them on the screen, hopefully. As you can see, 50% say they feel absolutely fine, 40% would be happier if they felt better informed, and 10% feel that it's not relevant. So that's interesting. We might actually revisit that at the end of the session to see whether there's been any change with that. So we're just going to move on then to the next slide, which is, and here's a question for you. What does the term mental health mean to you? Now, if you want to join in the discussion, you can either type, as I said before, you can type something in using the white arrow on the orange background, which you can click on to get the place for the live chat, or you can use the little question mark. You should have one or other if you're online. If you've joined by phone, you should be able to just type things into the webinar email address. We'll just wait a moment to see if any answers are coming through. Obviously, it takes a little while for anything to come through, but I'll move on anyway. So this is more of a description. Oh, it's interesting. Somebody said general mental health means mental ill health or mental health problems. It's really interesting, isn't it? Most people generally think when they hear the term mental health, they think about mental ill health, don't they? If you look at the description on here, we're talking about something that's quite a lot more holistic than that. We're talking about mental health influences how we think and feel about ourselves and others, and how we interpret events. It affects our capacity to learn, to communicate, and to form, sustain, and end relationships. And it influences our ability to cope with change, transition, and life events. So actually, what we're talking about when we're talking broadly about mental health is we're talking about something that all of us have. I mean, obviously, what we're going to focus on today is about poor mental health, but I think it's really important to sort of see that in the context of the fact that we all have mental health. So I've got another question for you now, which is, how can you tell if someone has poor mental health? It's a really interesting question, I think. Do feel free to join in and make comments if you would like to on that. I think it can be quite difficult always to tell. Obviously, I've got some suggestions on the slide, but interested to hear about any comments that anyone else has about that. Yeah, so I haven't had anything coming in yet, so I'm just going to show you this slide. Oh, here's somebody else, a change in behavior. Somebody has said, yeah, I think that it is really about a change, often more negative, somebody being perhaps more negative in their outlook. I mean, certainly I think that what we are looking at is a change in some way. It might be that they might be visibly distressed. They might be there may be performance issues, or somebody may be struggling with concentration. There might be complaints of tiredness. Often GPs pick up that someone's really struggling with their mental health because they're going with repeated minor ailments like minor aches and pains and things like that. It's possible there might be more conflict in the workplace. People might be more withdrawn. People might be taking on too much. And of course, they may tell you. So obviously, as you can see from that list, some of those things almost seem a little bit contradictory. You know, somebody might be taking on too much, or there may be performance issues. So I guess that what you're probably looking for is a change, but also I guess if you have an environment in your team where people feel able to talk and be open about things, that they may feel able to talk to you about it as well. So the next slide, I'll just try to explain this slide to you, but this is just thinking about actually who is in your office, what is the situation in your office. So I think what's important to remember is that 75% of people who have a diagnosable mental health condition receive no treatment at all. So the chances are that there will be people who have a diagnosis and many people who have no diagnosis. So I kind of like to think of it as it's a bit simplistic, but you will have some people in your team who have a mental health diagnosis, but they've actually got good mental health. They may have been diagnosed with a condition, but actually they've learnt to manage it. Maybe the medication is working for them. Maybe they have some really good coping strategies. They get good support in the workplace. And so actually their mental health is pretty good, even though they have a mental health diagnosis. You may also have some people in your team who have a diagnosis, but who are really struggling, whose mental health is quite poor at the moment. Then obviously you would hope that this would be the majority of people, you'll have some people in your team who have no diagnosis and they have good mental health. You know, they're managing their lives, they've got a good work balance, and they're sleeping well and those sorts of things. So they have good mental health. But there is a good chance that there will be other people in your office. Remember what I said about 75% of people who have diagnosable mental ill health receive no treatment at all. It is likely you will have people in your office who have never been diagnosed with a mental health condition, but they are struggling in some way. That might be to do with being unhappy, being really overstressed, poor sleep, low mood, and so on. So, you know, it's probably, I suppose I'm trying to illustrate that it's not necessarily a simplistic thing like either you've got good mental health or you've got poor mental health. It can be a whole mixture of those things. So we're just going to look at some mental health facts and figures now. So I don't know whether any of these are going to be a surprise to you. 1 in 4 of us will be affected annually by mental ill health. It's a lot of people. I think that's, you know, if you look around at your team, you know, on average that there will be people in there who will struggle with mental ill health at some point. Then we've got the next one, which is 9 out of 10 people who have mental ill health say that they have experienced some type of stigma or discrimination. I always find that quite shocking nowadays, but I think you need to see that in terms of not just being called names or being ostracized and that sort of thing, but you know, if people feel like I can't mention it at work because I feel like somebody's going to judge me, they're going to feel like I'm not pulling my weight, they're going to feel like I'm a bit fake, those kind of things, that can feel like discrimination. Another interesting fact or figure: women are diagnosed with depression twice as much as men. We don't actually think that that's because women have twice as much depression as men. We think there are also issues to do with men not always talking, not always seeking help. Yeah, because if you look at the next point on this slide, which is that of the 6,122 suicides in 2014 in the UK, 76% were men. So that's a real concern. That's a real concern as well, that we know that men are not approaching for help, but that the suicide rates are higher. And suicide is the biggest killer of men under 35 in the UK, but the highest rate is for men aged 45 to 59. So they're quite sobering figures, really, aren't they? And then the next slide is looking at facts and figures in the workplace. Sorry, this is rather a wordy. It's rather a wordy slide, but stress, anxiety, and depression is responsible for 15 million working days lost in 2013. I mean, I always feel like it almost gets to the point of it's a bit like Monopoly, isn't it? It's like the numbers are so high that it's really difficult to visualize them. 1 in 5 people takes the odd day off with stress, but 90% feel unable to be honest about the reason for their absence. I mean, I kind of initially I thought that was shocking, and then I thought about times when maybe I'd kind of felt pretty stressed, but maybe there was something else going on as well, and it was easier to talk about that than about something else. And actually, recently, I did take a couple of days off, and I was open about the reason that it was to do with my mental health. But it felt really risky to do that, and I feel like I work for an employer that is very supportive with those things. So it is worth being aware of that. 49% of people say that they would feel uncomfortable talking to their employer about mental health. And we also know, I don't know how many of you have come across the term presenteeism, but I always call it kind of moving the papers around the desk. People who are in work, but maybe are not really well enough to be in, although we know that there is good research that suggests that being in work generally is good. But presenteeism accounts for 1.5 times more losses in productivity than absences. And then the last one in here, for those of you phoning in research, 1 in 5 middle managers had felt stressed for more than a year, and 1 in 10 felt close to breaking point. So I think when kind of planning and delivering this webinar, we are thinking about what you can do for your team, but we're also doing that in the context of understanding that managers' lives can also be very stressful. So let's move on. Now we've looked at some facts and figures. So we're going to look next at what is stress. Now we've got another poll for you now, if I can manage to find it for you. Hang on a second. Just getting my colleague Kevin, who is here with me, helping with the technical things, that's it, yes, that's the one. So the question is a simple yes or no. Is stress a mental health condition? I'm really sorry to those on the phone who can't join in, but those of you who are joining in online, if you can vote on that now, and I can see already that we've got 70% saying yes, 30% saying no. 63% have voted so far. Any more coming in? Yeah, I think probably we'll close that now and just show you the results of that, which you should be able to see on your screens, which says 64% of you think that it is a mental health condition and 36% of you think it's not. So let's go on and see if I can get back onto the slide. Yes, so stress is actually not a mental health condition. It's a feeling of being under too much mental or emotional pressure. And pressure can turn to stress when we feel unable to cope. Stress can affect how you feel, think, and behave, and how your body works. So it's not a mental health condition in itself. But the reason that probably we spend a little bit of time talking about it here is because it really can contribute to mental ill health, and it can certainly affect well-being if it's not addressed. And the information about stress from there comes from the NHS Choices Mood Zone, which is a great website. that might be worth, might be worth your while having a look at. Okay, so we're going to look at now. There's another poll for you now, which is, oh dear, I'm needing technical help with this again. Which is, which of these can cause stress? So you've got a question here. You can tick as many of these as you want. Which of these can cause stress? Work, money, family life, moving house, or caring? So do feel free to start joining in with this now. Okay, so far everyone that's voted so far thinks that everything, which, yep, yeah. Let's have a look. Yeah, okay. So we'll close that now. We just share those results with you. You're absolutely right. I mean, everyone has said that all of those things can cause stress, which is absolutely right. Anything really can cause stress. I mean, that doesn't mean that all of those things. For some people, for example, their family life may actually be the thing that is a kind of a stress reducer, if you like. For some people, work. I mean, I speak to some people for whom work is like the only normality in their life, whereas for other people, those things can be really stressful. I think the other thing to think about in terms of stress is that the way we react to stress can also be impacted by how vulnerable we're feeling at the time. So if you can see on the screen you've got in front of you now, you've got this little chart which has got two axes. The one across the bottom is about vulnerability, and the one across the side is about stress. And what it shows, probably in a really simplistic way, is that the more vulnerable you are, the less stress that you can cope with before it may affect your mental well-being. So if you've got somebody in your team who's really resilient, whose mental health is good at the moment, the chances are they can deal with a lot more stress than somebody who is feeling quite vulnerable at the time. And I think that's one of the things, because I often talk to groups of staff, and I think one of the things that's really tricky in a workplace is that somebody comes up to you and says, oh, for example, this deadline, I'm finding it so stressful. And it's really easy to think, well, look, we've all got the same deadline, just kind of it, and to find it difficult to understand why one person is finding that really stressful when the other person is just getting on and cruising, and it's like maybe it's actually helping them to achieve more. And that the reason for that may well be in the level of vulnerability, or maybe to do with how much other stress they have going on in their lives. And I think that's the thing with stress. It's not like, okay, we can all cope with a certain amount before it becomes too much. Each of us has a different tolerance level, and obviously each of us have different things going on in our lives as well. So let's move on now to look at stress in the workplace. And I would invite you to share comments and ideas about what the causes of stress are in the workplace. So yes, I mean, obviously you can either join in if you're joined in online, you can join in through using the live chat function, or if you're on the phone, you can phone in. You can't phone in with it. You can email the webinar email address, webinar@foryoubyou.org.uk. So I'm wondering what causes. Let's have a look at these. Too much. The workload is one thing that's come in as being. I'm just turning to my technical assistance here about how to get further down. Yeah, workload is certainly one of the things that can. Oh, that's an interesting one. An issue about communication. I think that can be really key as well, because that, if the communication is poor and we're kind of left not really understanding what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah, and I guess that feels lack of support, poor morale. I think that's absolutely right as well. And that's the next one I've just seen on there, change. I mean, we know that all of us find change quite hard, and what the comment here has been about when it's not particularly well managed, but it can certainly, change can really. Oh dear, something's happened to my slides, which I wasn't expecting. So What else have I got here on the list? Yeah, so if difficulty understanding what the expectations are, I think that's that kind of uncertainty can be really important. And also, oh yes, bad rapport, difficult relationships. I think it's really interesting the things that have come up, because I think I'm going to show you in a minute what's this list is from the HSE, but I mean, the health and safety executive across the nations has got a very, very similar list for this, so it is applicable across. So the things that they say that cause the most workplace stress: workload, which has obviously come up, role uncertainty, that not quite being sure what you're supposed to be doing, lack of control. That's the situation where you have, that they think that autonomy, probably the greater autonomy you have, the better it is for stress levels. And then I think the next two, manager and peer support, those obviously they can be ones that are so great that can make life at work really good, but also they can make things much more difficult. Relationships overall, that can be a real difficult thing. We talk to people sometimes where really relationships in work have really broken down, and it has such an impact on their mental health. And then obviously change and how change is managed. Change is inevitable, but there is something around how change is managed and as communicated, I guess, as somebody has mentioned, communication as well. There's also something else that if you work in a customer facing role, that can be added on there, which is around kind of dealing with the public who may be aggressive, upset, distressed, those kind of things. So that if you're in a customer facing role, we know that can be really stressful. And quite often I talk to people who have been really struggling with their mental health, and one of the things they say is, I'm really finding being on the phones or working directly with customers or having to go from one appointment to another really difficult and stressful at the moment. So what I want to show you now, just for interest really, I want to show you something which might be interesting for you, which is a self-assessment tool which you'll be able to download. The link to it is, oh, okay, I may not be able to show it at the moment. Okay, I'm really sorry, the link to it has disappeared. So I'm not going to show it to you. What I was going to show you was a self-assessment tool that has been developed by the Health and Safety Executive, CIPD, and Investors in People. And it's kind of about manager behaviours which can impact the level of stress in their team. Obviously, it's been developed for England, but because it's a self-assessment tool, I think it's something that really could be done by anybody who was interested. Now, let's just see. This is, well, I'm sorry, I'm just consulting with my technical. So yeah, sorry folks, just a little technical hitch here. Yeah, so I think that although it's specifically for England, I think that actually it could be used by anybody. So I think we're just about managing to get back to the presentation now, and just bear with us a second while we get back to the right slide. What I could just say to you now is that there is, you may have seen anyway, that there's a handout of resources on that you can download, as well as a PDF of the slides, and that link is on there. So I mean, we do know that, I guess what we know is that manager behaviour can really impact on the well-being of the staff, but we also know that managers struggle themselves, and I think it's really important that in kind of looking after your staff, you're also modelling something around looking after your own well-being and having a good work-life balance and those sorts of things. In terms of your own stress levels, I mean, this session is really more about looking at supporting staff, but if you want to look at things for yourself, We're doing another, we will be doing another webinar about looking after your well-being, or there's a recording of one that's already on our website. But if you go onto our website and go onto the Wellbeing Hub, you would be able to access our stress test, where you could actually look at your own stress levels, and it will kind of calculate for you what your stress levels are like and suggest some resources for you as well. So we're going to move on now to look at anxiety. So, okay, hopefully we're back on track now, folks. So anybody wants to join in with any comments about what is anxiety? It's a term that we use quite freely, isn't it? And obviously it can be something that's quite normal that we experience, and it's something that can be much more significant, I guess, as well. So yeah, I mean, I think I'll move on to show the slide, and if any comments come in, then I'll yes. Oh, that's a really interesting one. Worrying about future events, worrying about what things that are going to happen. I think that's actually, I think that's a really good way of describing it, because you know, there's always something that's coming up that maybe you might be worrying about. So let's look at the slide. So this, again, this description is from the NHS Choices Mood Zone. So it's a feeling of unease, worry, or fear. It's quite normal, and we all experience anxiety at some point in our lives. It's not always a terrible condition. It's, you know, it's something normal that we all experience, and it can be helpful in some situations. A bit of anxiety can kind of just give you a bit of a kind of a lift and push you to perform better, those kind of things, or it can get you up in the morning, you know, those sorts of things. However, anxiety conditions last longer, are more severe, and affect day-to-day life. And anxiety affects you physically, as well as impacting on how you think, feel, and behave. I will say that in terms of people that are applying to the charity for assistance with mental health, I believe from the people that I talk to, anxiety really seems to be the biggest thing that people are experiencing. So I'm going to show you. This comes with a bit of a health warning around self-diagnosis. In other words, don't. But this, I'm just going to show you for your information about how doctors might actually be looking at about diagnosing somebody with an anxiety disorder. So it's called the Goldberg Anxiety Scale, and they would ask questions. Have you been feeling keyed up or on edge? Have you been worrying a lot? Have you been irritable? Have you been having difficulty relaxing? Have you been sleeping poorly? Have you had headaches or neck aches? Have you been trembling, tingling, dizzy spells, nausea, sweating, urinary frequency, diarrhea? Have you been worrying about your health? Have you had difficulty falling asleep? Now, whenever I kind of tell people about this, they all kind of start thinking, oh my goodness, I've got that one and that one and that one. I think what it's worth bearing in mind is that the average adult in the UK can probably tick 4 of those. So it's people with a much higher score than that who might be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. But that's just for your information about it, how it might be, excuse me, how it might be diagnosed. I'm just going to talk you very briefly. This is going to be a kind of a real kind of whiz through a few anxiety disorders. Just because you may come across them, people may tell you that that's what they're experiencing. So just to give you a very, very brief description of those things, what I would say is, if you're interested in knowing more about them, there are a range of places that you could that you can find out more. For example, the NHS Choices Mood Zone. The RCP, the Royal College of Psychiatrists website, actually has some very good, easy to understand information. And we've got some information on our website as well. So there's a range of places. Actually, if you go to the Mind website, Mind, a national mental health charity, they have a lot of information about different diagnoses as well. But just to take you through them, very quickly. So panic disorder, somebody probably wouldn't actually say I've got panic disorder. They might tell you that they suffer from panic attacks. So just for your information, a panic attack is something that comes on very quickly and probably lasts, well, 10 to 20 minutes. It comes and goes very quickly, but during the time that the person is experiencing it, it can be really scary. Often it mimics the symptoms of something like a heart attack or an asthma attack. And obviously, if you witness somebody in your office experiencing something that might be that, obviously you would need to get medical intervention. But panic attacks tend to be quite severe and quite short lasting. Yeah, and so a generalized anxiety disorder, people only get that if they've had symptoms for at least 6 months. But the generalized anxiety disorder might be the person who, there's always something for them to worry about. So if it's not one thing, it's another. They might be always imagining that things are going to go wrong, even when there's no evidence that's the case. So there isn't anything particular that causes anxiety. It's just everything. So that's generalized anxiety disorder. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, it's probably one of the ones that you're probably quite familiar with the name. I mean, it's kind of, I feel like it's been misused somewhat on television programs, obsessive cleaners and things like that. And, often you hear people saying, oh, I'm a bit OCD, which probably means they like their desk really tidy, or they like their kitchen cupboards with the tins all turned round in a particular way, or something like that. The issue with OCD is that, excuse me, it's a link between obsessive behaviors and what I would call intrusive thoughts. So people experience thoughts that something terrible will happen if they don't do those obsessive behaviors. It might be, if I don't count the stairs every time I go up, my mum will die. That's a kind of extreme one, but that may mean that people have to keep going up and down because they're not sure if they've counted properly. OCD is actually the least common of the anxiety disorders, and it can be so debilitating and impact so much on every aspect of life. Some people may experience social anxiety. That often kind of stems from childhood, from kind of shy children, maybe people who blush a lot, who find it very difficult to walk into an open plan office. That people with social anxiety may find it really difficult to be in meetings or to speak in meetings. There's always that fear of being kind of exposed, I guess. Phobias, I mean, you've probably all heard about phobias. The most kind of obvious ones is a fear about a specific thing. We've heard about fears of spiders and snakes and those sorts of things. Again, people often talk about, oh, I'm a little bit phobic about. But the phobias are extreme fears that can really impact on somebody's life. Yeah, I mean, the agoraphobia is fear of having a panic attack somewhere outside, which often limits people to their home. Lots of phobias can be really impactful, and they can seem to other people like they're ridiculous. That's one of the issues as well, because some of the fears that people have may seem ridiculous to you. Post-traumatic stress disorder is the last one on this list. So you may find it surprising to hear that more women than men are diagnosed with PTSD. Might be about the number of men who seek help, but it's a good reminder it's not just about the military and the police. It can be something like a really traumatic childbirth. It can be domestic abuse, those sorts of things as well. So if somebody's been through a traumatic event, it's quite normal to suffer some sort of reaction as a result of that. People may initially have flashbacks. They may have bad dreams. They may want to avoid certain places. That's perfectly normal for the first month. But if it goes on for more than a month, there is a concern that somebody might be developing PTSD. So that's I guess that's just a kind of a very quick trip around a range of anxiety disorders, just to give you, if you hear those words, just to give you a little bit more flesh on what they might mean. Okay, we're going to move on from anxiety now, and we're going to talk about depression. So, again, I will open this up to anybody who would like to join in, either on the webinar email address or through the live chat, for any comments around what is depression, or what does the term depression mean to you. I think we've all heard people saying, "Oh, we feel a bit depressed." Extreme low mood. Yes, I think and maybe the key to that is about extreme, rather than just that kind of, "Oh, I feel a bit fed up," rather than "I just feel a bit fed up today." Um, let's have a look at the slide while we're waiting to see if any other comments are coming in. So let's have a look at this. So yeah, I mean, we all feel fed up from time to time, but depression is when that goes on for most days, for most of the time, for several weeks. And it can affect a person's behavior and thinking, and it has physical and emotional effects. And it can affect the person's ability to get on with everyday life as well. People can feel hopeless, helpless. Often I've spoken to people who feel, when they're feeling depressed, it feels like it's just never going to end. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. Concentration can be very difficult. Lots of things like that. I've got a comment here. Yes, that's really interesting. Someone else has said a loss of interest in everyday activities. Yeah, and actually there's a second part to that, which is about having things to do but can't be bothered. And I think that's almost two things, isn't it? People often really lose interest in things that they previously got pleasure from. And also the thing about, it's really hard to motivate yourself to do anything. I can remember talking to someone recently who they were just finding it so difficult to motivate themselves to do more than just sit on the sofa, and I mean really working hard to try to do other things, but it was so difficult to do that, really. And we looked at the beginning of the session, didn't we, about how can you tell if someone is struggling with their mental health. And obviously the things on that slide still apply, but I always think this is an interesting slide to show as well. For those of you on the phone, I'll kind of describe it. There's a picture of somebody who I think is a woman, but I can't be absolutely certain, who's holding up a piece of paper in front of her. And at the top it says "I'm", and at the bottom it says "fine". But in between, there's a whole load of other words that have been crossed out: depressed, sad, hurt, confused, lonely, unloved, judged, misunderstood, insignificant, broken, dying inside. So it's that thing about you may not always be able to tell. Somebody may be kind of overcompensating. And that's the other thing, isn't it? It's like we've got so much of a culture nowadays, haven't we? Where you say to somebody, "Oh, how are you? Are you okay?" And you expect the answer, "I'm fine." You might even be halfway down the corridor before the person's had a chance to answer the question. And maybe one of the things that you might go away from this session thinking about is, if you're asking somebody how they are, to kind of make sure that actually you want to know what the answer is. Because I think so often we just assume that that it's almost just actually what we're saying is hello, really, rather than how are you. So that's, you may not be able to tell from the way somebody is presenting. And like with the anxiety, I'm just going to show you the kind of things that GPs would be looking at when they were diagnosing depression. I always think the first thing on this slide was it doesn't really make me smile. Signs and symptoms which have lasted at least 2 weeks. I mean, I've never spoken to anyone who's gone to the doctor within the first 2 weeks of experiencing the symptoms of depression. I think people tend to wait around. They think there must be something wrong with them. They blame themselves. They think they're weak. They think they should just pull yourselves together. Yeah, so, but these are the signs and symptoms that the GP would be looking for. Low mood, as we've already talked about, and loss of interest or pleasure, which we've already mentioned. And also, we've kind of talked about the decreased energy, the difficulty in kind of getting up and doing things. People may also experience a real loss of confidence or low self-esteem. There may be lots of feelings of guilt. I should pull myself together. I should be able to do this. People may have recurrent suicidal thoughts, or they may be making suicide attempts. Poor concentration or slowed thinking. I think we mentioned that, didn't we, at the beginning of the session as one of the signs. People may have disturbed sleep. They may have disturbed appetite. I mean, that's not all of them, but that's just some of the things. That's just some of the things. Oh, okay. I've just got a note from my colleague Kevin. I think we must have a group of people in Portsmouth. So just to say thank you to everyone in Portsmouth for joining us, and we'll make sure that you have the handout with the list of resources after the session. So. So we've talked about stress, anxiety, and depression, and then let's look a bit about what you can do. So where are we? Just bear with me a second, folks. So let's have a look at what we've got on this list. Okay, so obviously you can support your team at times of pressure. And I think it's really important not to be scared to be talking about mental health and well-being. I feel like quite often that we talk to so many people who say, you know, I would like to do this, but I'm worried. I'm worried I'll make it worse. I'm worried that I'm going to open a can of worms and I don't know what I can do with it. Those sorts of things. I think it's that you also could have a role in kind of stifling gossip, bullying, stigma, and discrimination. Those kind of, I mean, you know, there's kind of things where you hear people maybe saying, oh, so and so's off with stress, and you see them using those little inverted commas with their fingers, as though actually what they're saying is actually someone's just swinging the lead or something like that. And obviously it's tricky because there are whole issues around confidentiality as well. But I think that there is a role, and obviously then there is things around creating an open culture so that it does feel like it's okay to talk about things. And obviously I think I talked earlier about kind of modeling, looking after your own well-being, considering things around your own work-life balance and those sorts of things. So we're going to move on to talking about starting a conversation. I've got another poll to do now. Let's see how we get on with this one. So, right. So the question is, which best describes your feelings about talking to a staff member with mental health issues? Just tick one of these. Oops, I can't see it on the screen at all. But the questions are, I feel comfortable about it. I don't really know what to say. I'm worried I'll make it worse. It's not I don't want to, but I really don't have time. Or it's not my job. People should keep their problems to themselves. I mean, you may well feel that more than one of those actually applies, but if you just go for one for the time, yeah. Okay, well, that's great. So I've got about half the people are saying that they feel quite confident about it, which is absolutely great. Some people are saying they don't really know what to say, and there's another group of people that are saying they're worried about making things worse. So that's great. We'll just see if we can share that poll with you. Yeah, so you should therefore be able to see the poll results now, as you can see as I described. Right, so let's go back onto the next slide, which is about yeah, I mean, let's move on to the next slide rather than faffing around. Okay, so let's talk about about having a conversation. I think this just lists some of the things. I mean, obviously, we've got more than 50% of you who feel quite confident about it. So I guess in some ways, I'm kind of talking to the converted in many ways. But here are some hints and tips. Being prepared to listen. You know, I've talked to somebody who told me he'd been off on quite a prolonged period of sickness absence, and when he plucked up courage to talk to his manager about it, his manager didn't lift his eyes from the computer screen when he was talking about it. And he told us that actually what that meant was his sickness absence was so much longer than it would have been otherwise. So be prepared to listen to people, give them uninterrupted time. I think it's really important to be non-judgmental. There may be performance issues that have to be dealt with, but I think it's really important to be non-judgmental about how somebody is. Use open questions. Ask somebody how they are and listen to how to what they're saying. I think um, that, yeah, just provide an environment where people can speak. It can be really tempting when you're talking to someone and there's a little bit of a silence to try and fill it. I think that's to do with our own anxieties around what's going to happen in that conversation. But actually, just sit with silence sometimes. The person may fill it, it may give them time to actually gather their thoughts and think about what what they can say to you. And remember, just the way that you're sitting with someone, the way that you're showing that you're giving them attention and that you want to hear what they're saying. Ask somebody what will help, because there may well be things in the workplace that can help. You may want to ask them, have they seen their GP? They may be needing to get some support. You may have mental health first aiders in the workplace that you could signpost people to as well. That you may be signposting to other things like the employee assistance provider, the charity. I will talk a little bit if I've got time before we finish about what we do as well. So we're now going to move on to look at what might help in the workplace. So the kind of things that can help in the workplace, reasonable adjustments, and there is a reasonable adjustment passport that's been developed, a civil service wide one that has been developed, which can be used. And I think people get really nervous about reasonable adjustments, and they think that they're going to be major things and they're going to really impact on kind of performance and those sorts of things. But actually, reasonable adjustments can really improve morale and help people to do the job that they're employed to do, really. You might be looking at an occupational health referral. You might be looking at signposting someone, as I just mentioned, EAP, the charity, their doctor, and so on. What else can help? You can host wellbeing events. That's not about dealing with an individual, but by hosting wellbeing events, you're giving a message about how you see wellbeing and how you want to support it. Talk about mental health. I don't mean by that I'm saying that you all have to kind of talk about your own mental health, but it can make sure that it's something that people feel comfortable talking about, that you're comfortable talking about it. So I'm just going to show you now some of the resources that we've got on our website. The website has actually been updated quite recently. There's a really good wellbeing hub where you can which you should be able to find really easily from the homepage on our website. You can identify the things that you're interested in and stick in your email address, and we'll then send you resources. So that's a great thing to do. We've also got Dogbot, which is a new form of a chat bot, really, thinking that dogs are lovely and kind and we all like stroking them and they make us feel better, who will kind of take you through what can be available from the charity. We've had quite good reports so far, really, from conversations. On that same page, there's a link to information about help for managers as well. As I mentioned earlier, there is a stress test. If you go onto our website and go onto digital resources, you've got a link to our stress test. Also, a link to relationship counselling. We know that quite often people who are experiencing kind of struggle, personal struggle, stress, anxiety, depression, relationship may be an issue. So there's that. We've also got a Law Express Express app. If there is a legal issue, you can also access a mindfulness course online as well. And then we know that stress, anxiety, and depression can also be linked to things like money and caring. There are also links to those sorts of things on our website as well. So there is quite a lot of resources out there. So what I'm going to do now is in a moment, I'm just going to talk you through the things that um, the things that that we can do as a charity. But I want to go back to the first poll to see how things are, and then I'm hoping Kevin will very cleverly help me to compare them. So we're going to go back to the first poll we did, which was about how do you feel about having people with common mental health conditions in your team. Again, 100% absolutely fine. How marvelous. Okay. I don't think I need Kevin to I don't think I really need Kevin to compare, because I know that is showing a significant change, and I'm really pleased, and I do hope that I know that not everyone has voted yet, and I by saying 100% people say feeling absolutely fine, I really don't want people to feel pressured that they need to say that, because we've done an hour's session, the chances are you will still feel cautious about it. You may have some concerns still. You may still feel really that you should be better informed, because an hour doesn't really tell you enough. But it's really it's good to see that there's been a change. We'll just close that one, I think. Okay, so let's move on now to talk about what the charity can do. We've just got about 5 minutes left. So as predicted, we probably won't have time for many questions at the end. Where are we? Moving on. Okay, here we are. So obviously you've seen quite a lot about what we do in terms of online support, and really encourage you to look at our website and look around in terms of particularly the Wellbeing Hub and Dogbot. So for yourselves and for your team members. But if somebody actually makes an application to the charity and they mention they're struggling with mental health wellbeing issues, we offer them a supportive conversation on the telephone. We're not counsellors, but we offer a conversation where we give them a chance to talk about things like, how are they? How have they been over time? What type of support have they used, or do they think would be helpful? And from that, we try to help them to decide where they may be able to go for support. There may be occasions when we can give them a route to some specialist charities that we've got partnerships with, things like Anxiety UK, for treatment for anxiety, relationship counselling. We've also got a partnership with the National Autistic Society, and we've mentioned Law Express already. Some of those referrals would include needing financial information from the individual, but we talk them through those kind of things. But having a supportive conversation and just talking through how things are and that sort of thing, really, that people can just apply. There's no financial requirement for any of that. So on the next slide, I think I've really talked about that. This is just about what we don't do. We don't offer mental health treatment, medication advice, or interventions. We're not counsellors. I think this is really important. We don't have a guaranteed solution to all problems. Gosh, mental health issues and conditions are really complex, and sometimes we're able to suggest something that can make a real difference. And, I always think, what we know is that having a conversation can make a real difference. Sometimes our conversation with us, you may find that people having a conversation with you can make a real difference to them as well. The other thing we don't do is we don't replace services that are available. So we would ask people about whether they had already used their employee assistance provider, because that's a free service that is made available to them. We would also talk to them about services through the NHS, but we know that there is a long wait for that, so we might well suggest other things in the meantime for that. And in terms of the other kind of things that we do, I think that in many ways these all link up together. Obviously the charity is known for financial assistance. I mentioned relationships and caring already. Law Express money advice. In many ways although we've kind of got separate services, all of these things really are linked up with well-being. You know, if people are struggling financially, it impacts their well-being. If people have got debt, it does. If people are carers, it does. So, whole range of things that you can signpost people to for that. So we are at 11:58, which is not bad timing. Um, so, oops, I appear to have lost your slide. There we are. Um, that's the end of the webinar. You will get a an evaluation form that will pop up if you've joined online. I'm not quite sure how you get it if you've joined on the phone, but I think you'll get it by email, and we'd really appreciate if you could complete that. Obviously, we've sold this as an opportunity for questions Q&A as well, which we just haven't got. What I would suggest is that if you've got questions related to this, if you could send them to the webinar at foryoubyou.org.uk website, perhaps over the next week or so, we can then look at them and put together something that can be put on the website so that you've got that. But obviously, I realise this is it's a really superficial introduction, but I hope it's been helpful for you. And thanks very much, everyone. Take care. Bye bye.